first talk, she said, do about 30 minutes. So I thought, 20 minutes of content, 10 minutes of Q&A. And then she said, oh, well, you can have an hour. So what we will do is I will do the first 20 minutes that I have prepared. We'll stop and take questions and answers. And because this talk that I'm presenting today is actually part of a longer talk, it was actually a 2-hour-long workshop. So there's more than enough additional material for us to talk about and to fill the time. Do feel free to throw things into the chat box as we go. I'm going to stop at the 20-minute mark or thereabouts and take those questions, and we will talk about those. So feel free to put those in as you think of them so you don't lose track of them. And if others come up as we're going, just put those in. And then we'll talk about we'll figure out what we're going to do with our extra half hour if we want to answer some additional questions, if there's another segment that you'd like me to cover in its entirety, or if we just want to be flexible and end early, because goodness knows a meeting could end early and everybody would be okay with that. So we're going to be real flexible today. That's enough introduction. I'm going to hit share screen and tell it which screen to share here. And we will hope that it looks like it worked. Excellent. Let me drag my screen here so I see you folks here as well with my video. Okay, now that is, if you're a Twitter person, at Becky McCray is my Twitter handle. Feel free to live tweet the event. I'm not monitoring Twitter right this second, but I can catch up with it as we go. The first thing that we have to talk about though is, I need to switch things here, and there, it worked. Okay. So we have to figure out why the buildings are empty, especially if you have a bunch of empty buildings in your town. Then it's important to figure out what is the root cause. Maybe there's one cause that's holding them empty. So if you figure out what that root cause is before you start trying to fill empty buildings, you may multiply your results because you'll fill one and it'll help you to fill a whole bunch of them all at the same time. So let's start with some of the most common issues that we run into. And one of them is the cost of code compliance, such as bringing those buildings up to code, remodeling costs. Huge deal in small towns. Our buildings are not in great shape just because they've been there for over 100 years, a lot of them, or coming up on 100 years. So you may want to talk to your local economic development group or your industrial development authority, whoever you have for county level, for city level, for whatever level will apply, and see if you can get them to think about some targeted incentives, maybe some matching funds to help cover part of the cost of bringing buildings up to code. Instead of only having incentives that target just recruiting businesses to move in from out of town, what if we targeted providing a little incentive to help people bring a building up to code so that they could take advantage of a downtown location? So there have been communities that have done that. I think it's a really great idea. Long term, one good goal to have is to change your current zoning and code requirements so that they are less onerous. And specifically, there are some targeted exactly for building reuse, historic buildings or adaptive reuse. And these are a lot more flexible than taking the traditional new construction codes and applying them to these 100-year-old buildings. So that's something that you can do long term. Another issue is a lot of small towns have a list of restricted uses of what's allowed downtown. Now, I don't know why, but these kind of took hold earlier last century. And some of them are still hanging around on the books and maybe restricting what people can do in your downtown. So just remember, if one council could pass those rules, then today's council can pass some new rules. So you're not stuck with those rules forever. And in fact, New London, Connecticut had a 1/3 vacancy rate in their downtown in 2008, which was just like at the height of the economic downturn or the bottom of the economic downturn. And one factor that they identified as a real problem for filling those was that short list of what was allowed to be an allowable use downtown. So the city stepped up and, responding to those concerns, increased the list of allowable uses, so more things were possible downtown. They also considered some waivers for city fees, and they streamlined those city processes so it wasn't such a huge hurdle to try to go through the process of redevelopment or getting your permits and the things like that that you absolutely have to do. In 3 years, through some really difficult economic times there in Connecticut, they were able to really significantly cut down on their vacancies. This one, the absentee owners and the inactive local owners, this is so common. I think we all have this. We have people who own a building, but they don't live there. Or they own a building and they're really only there in body because they're not there in spirit. They might as well be absentee because they just don't care about what's going on with that building. So it's a long process to change somebody's thought process of how they feel about their building. So let's talk about that. The first thing is you may need to recognize they probably feel a little guilty about some big plans from the past that fell through. You know, they meant to do something with that building when they bought it, or when they inherited it, they had ideas, or maybe it was an important family business that was in there. And for years, they have meant to be doing something with that building, and they have big dreams that maybe fell through. So people have a lot of complicated emotions and baggage tied up in those empty buildings that you wouldn't necessarily think about. So it's important to be just a little understanding of that when you start this process. So you want to talk to them about how important their property is, how it matters to the town. You want to honor what used to be there, whether that was a family business or something else. Think about their important roles as community leaders. Talk to them that way. I mean, I think it's kind of a smart thing to appeal to their vanity just a little bit and tell them how important they are. And talk about how in 10 years or so, this property is going to be the home to something wonderful that's the key to downtown, or that it's going to play a key role in revitalizing downtown for their daughters or for their granddaughters. See, we found that sometimes people who don't see any future for themselves necessarily will see a future for their kids and grandkids. And so it's kind of like a weak spot that you can use to reach out to people and say, hey, let's talk about the future for the future generations in a way that they can't see it for themselves. So a guideline you can use when you talk to folks that are sticking to a building is you can tell them, well, you know, if you haven't cleaned the windows in the last 12 months, or you haven't spent $500 invested in maintenance in that building, then maybe it's time to let it go. So that's just a rule of thumb. And I will be honest, I made it up, but you can say like Becky McCray, downtown expert, uses this rule of thumb. they don't know it's just somebody, that it's just me. But if you tell them that, then that can help them have a reason that they can let it go. You know, sometimes they just need a reason. And so your reason may be, you know, you haven't been able to maintain it. And here's the guideline: 12 months since you cleaned the windows, or $500 this year and invested in it, then maybe it's time to let it go. Now, when we talked about this initially, Nancy, we emailed, this was part of my email newsletter, and Nancy emailed me back and she said, this reminds me of a building owner in Topeka, North Topeka, owned a building and kept it safe and covered, was the way they talked about it. We kept this building safe and covered for 20 years, waiting for what was a blighted area to turn around and become the Noto Arts District through that community arts movement that changed it. So if that movement is afoot in your downtown, then talk to them about how they have done a good thing by protecting the building this long, and now it's time to turn it in and let somebody use it as part of the community revitalization. And the reason I spend so much time on this one subject of how do we change people's thinking is because it's a huge issue, because until they change how they think about their building, they'll never let go of it. So that's important. Now, another thing is you may have folks that have the used for storage. This is, I think, in every town. You know, buildings were cheap downtown a few decades ago. People bought them and they put their junk in them. So if they're full of junk, then, and especially if they're determined to hang on to it, then let's get the building back into beneficial use right now, even though it's still full of junk. And you can start with the windows, and there are bunches of ideas of things you can do with the windows. And I selected just one for our talk today, which is to talk about using those front windows. If they will clean out the front windows and partition them off, the photo that you see there, that's in Alva, Oklahoma. That is an actual building used for storage. They cleaned out the front windows and they hung a drape behind the window display. And then a business that has no presence downtown otherwise rented the front windows and put in a display of their retail merchandise that's available for sale. Gives them a presence downtown, and it puts what is otherwise a junk building into at least some useful service for the community right now. So then talk to them. If you can get them to do the windows, then talk to them about the first 10 feet. Because if you could get them to clean out that first 10 feet, then when there's a big event downtown, maybe we could pop up some displays or booths or vendors in there that could be part of the event. And they would just need to be in that first 10 feet, put some little dividers, hang some sheets, whatever you need to do to cordon off the junk, but then they could use part of the building in a productive use, and then just keep doing them, 10 feet at a time until you roll them, until they clean out the whole building. So that's a process. If they're working with you, you can work with them section by section at getting the building back into use in stages. And then that leaves them the opportunity to still hold on to that big dream of using the building someday themselves, while still putting it into productive use right now, instead of waiting until the stars align and everything happens beautifully and magically they can do it all at once. But talk to them about pop-up and temporary uses. If they won't even clean the windows, talk to them about the sidewalk and then the windows and then the first 10 feet, and then just roll them back as you work with them. Temporary uses so that you can get it back into use right away. If they will not budge and they will not let you do anything at all with the building, they will not help at all, call the fire marshal. I didn't make this one up. When we did the 2-hour workshop on this in Stillwater, Oklahoma, a member of the audience said, call the fire marshal on them. And I went, that could work. So, we all know that a building full of junk is a big fire hazard. The photo that you see here, this is actually theoretically an open business, like they're open 1 or 2 days a month. But man, I'm telling you, we've all seen our share of fire hazard kind of buildings. So you may want to bring in your fire chief, your fire marshal, the top safety related official in your jurisdiction, or you may need to go up the chain of command. Maybe you want to go to the county, maybe you want to go to the state, maybe you need to talk, to go up the chain of command to have somebody that can come in and go, you're going to need to clean it out or there'll be fines. And so that kind of thing can work when they will not budge for any other reason. And that's the sledgehammer approach. And so don't ever start with that. Don't start with that. But it's good to have that tool in your arsenal. Another trick that we run into is it's just cheaper to hold on to it and ask an outrageous price and pretend like you're selling it. This is especially true of those big corporate owners that somehow bought a building in your downtown and they are holding on to it forever because they can just sit on it with it on their balance sheet and they don't care, with an outrageous price on it. So something that other towns have done successfully to defeat that tactic is to charge additional fees, taxes, however you need to refer to it in your jurisdiction to make it work. You can do something. You charge somehow, charge them money for letting it sit empty. And in the handout that Nancy's going to share with you, there are links to a couple of news stories of towns that have done this so that you can get some ideas. So, look at the option of charging them, especially those corporate owners that are just sitting on it with that outrageous big city price on it. If it's going to cost them to hold on to it, then those corporations will be far less interested in sitting on it. And you'll notice the photo that we have here. This building is a particular type of building, which is the roofless building. It used to be a building, and now there's no roof on it anymore. And so now it's just a shell. And what could you do with that? And that's one of the sections that we can optionally cover part of. And the second half of our time today is what to do with those roofless buildings, because they don't have to sit just like you see here, a ruin with nothing going on and looking like a horrendous eyesore in your downtown. There's lots of things that can be done right now, even though it does not have a roof on it. So that's something to be thinking about for coming up. All right, I'm going to grab a sip of water right here. All right, we are going to talk about clouded titles, because sometimes buildings get inherited by people, and sometimes they get inherited by a whole group of people in undivided shares, or it's just not even really clear now who owns the building. We're just not even sure. So that's a big problem that you want to try to prevent if possible. Tracking those down and fixing them is a big project, and so to the extent possible, you'd like to prevent that from happening. One of the links in the handout today is to the Center for Community Progress. They have a 2-article set on dealing with tangled titles and preventing them from happening. And so there's a link to those, or you can just search it up. It's at the Center for Community Progress, and their phrase is tangled titles. And so you can search for that. It's a good article series, and I think it addresses a real issue that we have in a lot of small towns. Another issue that you may be dealing with is there's no activity whatsoever. which is there's just nothing going on downtown. And so what can you do about the fact that there is nothing going on in your downtown? Well, you're going to have to liven things up, at least temporarily. You'll have to give people ideas of what kind of business could be going on down there. You'll have to show them the possibility of what it could look like. So you want to start with short term, because it's always easier to do something just once in a short term than it is to try to do the big perfect solution, to completely revitalize the downtown is a big project. But to make it look really awesome for a weekend is a lot easier. So start with those short term, temporary pop-up events. Give people a glimpse of what could be possible. What could it be like? This is Winoka, Oklahoma. They used some pop-up businesses to add some life to their existing businesses downtown during their all-school reunion. So they had a lot of folks that were back in town, a lot of alumni were running around, and so, there are several buildings downtown where people are doing class reunions by all the different classes, but there's just not a lot of businesses available to serve them. So they popped up some businesses right in the street. They have beautiful, super wide streets, so they just took over some parking area and popped up businesses right there in the street. And it's a good solution because it lets people see the potential. Several people tried out businesses that they were interested in doing. There's a photographer who did like a photo booth kind of thing. She didn't have a full-size studio, so she was just testing out this idea. But it added a lot more life, and it gave everybody an idea of what the town could look like when everything is going well. So if you don't have any life out downtown, make some happen temporarily. Then we get to another super common one, which is people are just asking too much in rent, and we don't know why they get this idea. My building's worth $2,000 a month, even though I'm in downtown Iuka. It's just not going to happen. So what can you do about those building owners that are asking too much? So I'm going to tell you the story of one person who dealt with this. This is Julie Worley, who was in Rocky Ford, Colorado, and she sent me a story about this when we talked about it. And she worked for 10 years in economic development there in Rocky Ford. Their population is about 3,000 people. So they're a good sized small town, but not a really big town. And so while she was working there, when she first started, what she did is she called everybody that owned a vacant building in town. She found out who they were, got their phone number, and called them up and said, I want to come tour your building. And so the building owners, most of them agreed and took her on a tour of their building. She got to see what the buildings were like, what could be in there. And at the end of the tour, she would turn to them and say, point blank, I will rent your building. I will find you somebody that will rent your building if you let me negotiate the rent. And she said, you can imagine the looks I got when I said that. And I'm sure she did, which was, and I'm sure she heard some choice language from folks too. But one brave fellow who happened to be one of those absentee building owners who had come to town, he came back into town just to give her the tour. He really wanted to rent his building out. So he said, yeah, go for it. See what you can do. He had a 4 storefront building right on Main Street, right on the highway. So she started looking at filling it. And what she did, her basic technique was to trade down some of the rent in exchange for the renter making improvements to the space. So one space they wanted, a local person wanted to do a coffee shop there, but the plumbing was not up to speed for the coffee shop. So the woman did the plumbing work, paid for it herself out of pocket, knowing she would get that investment back because she was going to get her rent reduced until it was paid off. So she got a credit against her rent month to month until it was paid off. It took 18 months to pay off that plumbing stuff. And then she was able to afford the higher rent. So that was a good trade. And then they did this as well. They had, one of them was an existing hair salon, but they needed some plumbing upgrades as well. Plumbing, a big upgrade than commonly needed in small towns. So she paid for the plumbing upgrade and took a credit against her rent. In another case, there were some facade improvements that needed to be made for one of the storefronts. The renter took on the facade improvements and traded those back against the rent. And so using that technique, Julie was able to fill all 4 storefronts for this absentee owner. And then, of course, people called her up. Hey, Julie, fill my building. And she said, all right, but I'm negotiating rent. She said that, she only, in that second round, only got one more taker. But eventually, over the course of 10 years, she helped 17 little businesses start in downtown Rocky Ford. Now, at the end of that, at the end of her email, she said it had been years since she was there, and only 4 of those 17 were still in operation as of the time she wrote to me, which was, I think, another 10 years later. But I think we're going to talk about that because I think that is a natural thing. It will not stay full. You will not reach full and stay there in your downtown. Things will come and they will go. A friend of mine from California told me that it is like breathing. It is a natural process. Businesses come and they go, and you have to be prepared for that. So don't feel like you're going to get the thing filled and then we'll be all done. All right, now sometimes it may just be a mental block that people are thinking about things the way they used to be. In my colleague Deb's case, she was in Webster City, Iowa, and the empty buildings there were a symptom of some bad negative thinking. Everyone was still thinking about the jobs that had been lost. They had, in a town of 7,500, they had lost 750 jobs. But it had been a couple of years ago. And so she said, you know, we've got to change the way everyone's thinking. So what she did is she started a project to show off the empty buildings that they had. And it was called the Tour of Empty Buildings. So the first question, you know, people said, what, you know, why do you want to do a tour? So here's the story of how it got started. When she drove into town to do her job interview for Chamber of Commerce director, she counted 13 empty buildings on her way into town. And then during her first week on the job, the movie theater closed. So there was a lot of negative talk. And during one of those conversations, just out of exasperation, she said, all right, we're going to have a tour of empty buildings. We're going to show them off. And why would you do that? And that is to show people the potential of what could be going on and to get people talking about it all over town. She said, somewhere in this town and county is a person who is looking to locate in one of those buildings. Somewhere there is a kid just out of college who wants to move home and live and work here. And somewhere there's a person with a desire to be an entrepreneur. And I think that perfectly encapsulates why you would change this perspective about how you view your empty buildings. So here's what they did for the preparation. They gathered the intelligence from the county, found out who all the building owners were, and Deb walked through each one of those empty buildings with the city manager and with a construction professional so they could spot any issues that were going to need to be addressed immediately and to talk about, you know, what would work in a building like this. They got 11 buildings onto the tour that the building owners agreed to let them be toured. They made a map. You picked up the map and did just kind of a self-guided tour. All 11 of the buildings on the tour were cleaned up and prepared for business or for visitors. And if you have any empty buildings in your town, you know that if nothing else happened, that was a big win because 11 empty buildings were cleaned up and made ready for people to look at. That's a big win. So they did place a building owner or a real estate professional in every single building and added some chamber volunteers who could talk about the history of the building. And then just did their self-guided tour. People just walked around and looked at all of the buildings. And it really got everybody talking about what was possible. And there was a ton of follow-up. But that conversation really excited the community, got them talking about the future instead of focusing on the past. So what were the results? A year later, 10 of those 11 buildings had businesses in them, 10 out of 11. In a community, remember, that was still focused on that 750 jobs they'd lost. It changed everything. So one of the businesses was a second location for a business that is located in another town. One business actually picked up stakes and moved to Webster City to take advantage of one of those buildings. But most of them were just started by local people. And 3 of them were restaurants, which I thought was a big win in a town of 7,000 people to have 3 new restaurants. And they saved the movie theater. That's Deb there with the movie theater. And you can see that she's pretty excited because they were able to save that. They raised $250,000 out of that town to save that theater. So I can hear my clock is getting ready to strike the hour. So I have an old fashioned wall clock. You can just see the edge of it just right there. But I'll show you just a couple of other people that have done tours here. One is Crow's Nest Pass in Alberta, Canada. And that's not even one community. It's actually 5 little towns spread across a mountain pass. And then the municipality altogether has about 5,000 people spread across these 5 towns. And they found 11 empty buildings that they put yellow flags on all the participating buildings. They put a real estate agent or the building owner in each building. Added pop-up boutiques in some of the empty buildings, which I thought, ooh, that's really smart, because then there's an extra reason for people to come in and they had refreshments. And so that gave everybody a good incentive to go in, and they had a good tour. Vinland, New Jersey they're a bigger town. They have a population of about 61,000. So they're like a big town. But they did a vacancy tour specifically for real estate brokers and business developers. So pardon my clock there. And they held a lunch where they talked about the future of the downtown area, what was going on. The Main Street group put together a fact sheet about each empty building. Then they went and took the developers, toured the empty buildings and showed them what was available, and talked about the information about incentives that were available. So that was a really smart move because they were a little bit larger community. One last story about a larger community, and this is from Cork, Ireland, which has about 125,000 people. Even if you cannot do a tour, if you're like, that is out of the question, there's no way we can do it. My friend Paul Omani is doing this just with photos on Instagram, because he went around and he was noticing, as they went through an economic downturn there in Cork, he was noticing the number of empty buildings and empty spaces in Cork. He started shooting pictures of them and posting them. He started out with just the hashtag abandoned Cork. And I thought, nah, it's not very positive. But he started doing opportunity Cork as well. And then a light bulb went on over my head and I went, oh, he's got an opportunity to stake a claim on this, to start a public discussion about the kind of things he'd like to see happen. And just like that tour of empty buildings changed the way people talked about empty buildings there in Webster City, then this project of just posting photos with the hashtag gives you a chance to start a community discussion about the opportunities that you have around you. 2 useful links for resources that you can use, and then I think there were some questions that came up in the chat. This one is from University of Wisconsin Extension, and it is just a collection of actual real world examples of businesses that went into buildings downtown in small towns. And my colleague Deb and I contributed a couple of those, but the bulk of them are from all over. And their target size town was 1,000 people. So although there are some examples from larger communities, their target size was towns of 1,000 and smaller. So that should suit for most everybody. And the link to that will be in your handout. There will also be a link to a booklet I put together that has business ideas specifically for small towns and some ways that people can make their own business ideas. Because if you start talking about empty buildings, someone will say, well, what could I put in there? And you're going to need to have something on hand so that you can give them some ideas of what they could do. So I'm going to see if I can pull up the chat, which we'll see if I can do that. Ah, here we go. More chat. There we go. Which was the community? Webster City, Iowa. Okay, good deal. So we got the one chat there. Do you have other questions or things? Oh, I'll keep it off of that screen. Okay. Other things that you want me to cover, folks? I am at your pleasure here.
Okay, I've unmuted all of your phones. We'll see whether that works. But if you have a question for Becky, just go ahead and say it.
Becky, this is David Criswell in Wilson. I'd like to know if you have any experience in any of the small towns that have empty buildings that are owned by the railroad goes through the town, and working with the railroad to try to, whether it's a depot or grain storage buildings or whatever, just buildings that are owned, and on the railroad right away in the town.
Okay, that's a great question. Nancy, you want to go ahead and mute everybody again because we've got lots of background there.
There we go. Whoops, except you. There you go.
Unmuted. Okay. So, David, this is a really great question, and this is a tough question. I understand exactly why you have asked it, because I used to be the city manager for the town of Winoka, Oklahoma, which is population at that time 993 people. This is a decade ago, so I'm kind of dating myself here. But Winoka is a railroad town and was long a crew station, and there's a huge yard and a beautiful depot and a Harvey house where they used to serve lunch, and then a crew station. And I mean, it's just an amazing set of facilities there. But dealing with the railroad is an enormous challenge because they do not play nice, and they don't care about you. They only care about, the bottom line, and they're huge, and they are impersonal, and you can't talk to the same person twice about anything in legal issues. What Winoka has done in order, and they have that Harvey House and the depot are right on the railroad right of way, and they have succeeded only by dint of being incredibly persistent. And they spent years and decades getting those properties away from the railroad and getting possession of the properties, and then letting them still be on the right of way, and then fencing issues about what had to be, what the railroad required of them. It's not easy to do, but as far as I know, the only key to the success of Winoka was they were absolutely doggedly persistent and never took it personal. So I don't have any other specific secrets of how you succeed with that other than you just keep at them. I mean, I spent personally, as a city manager, I spent 9 months getting a permit to put a water line under the railroad tracks. So, 9 months to get a permit. It's just insane. So persistence, it's persistence. All right, a couple of other questions. Candace has asked about that tour of empty buildings, contact info for communities that have done this. The Webster City, Iowa is one, and my colleague Deb Brown was the person who put that on. And she is currently with the Chamber of Commerce. Although her tenure there is coming to an end, she's going out on her own to do projects. She and I are doing projects, and she's doing some stuff on her own as well. So she said she's going to be doing bigger and, reaching more people. And Bill has this same question as well. Additionally, Deb and I, because there's so much interest in this, we actually have put together a little mini course you can take by email. That teaches you everything that Deb did to make her tour work. And there are some articles that are available on this, and these are listed in your handout as well. And actually, if you start Googling around on tour of empty buildings, you can find an awful lot that's actually out there, public and available right now. In addition to, if you're super serious about it and you'd like the additional information, we do have that course available. So you can take that. And it comes to your email. It's super easy to do. You don't have to, it's not really complicated to do. So that's available as well.
I'm aware that in Kansas, at least Mulvane, Kansas, and Russell, Kansas have both done it in the last year or so.
Awesome.
So if Candace and Bill want to talk to somebody in Kansas that's done it.
Mulvane and
Russell.
Cool. See, it's a thing. Now everybody does it. I think it's awesome.
I think I found out about Mulvane from your handouts at one point, but
okay.
But Russell did theirs. Yeah, well, and then I Googled it and found out, well, yes, I can see it right here. But Russell did it in the past 12 months.
Okay, Cindy wants to know if she can use some of the materials and information for newsletter articles without a copyright infringement. If it's one of ours, if it's something that I have written or that Deb Brown has written, then you just email us, or there's a contact form on saveyour.town, which that's the website address, saveyour.town. I guess it's on the screen too. There's a contact form there that you can use to just let us know that you want to use it. We're real flexible, especially for nonprofits that want to use it. We'll be glad to let you have some permission to read, but not the stuff we charge for. Okay, that's the distinction. The stuff we put out for free, we're glad to let you reuse it, but the stuff that's actually our proprietary course, no, we don't want you to reuse that. So, and I know you knew that, Cindy. So, okay. Ooh, this is a good one. This is from DK, who says, has anyone tried posting a QR scan code in the windows so that those interested could scan the code and get updated pictures, building sizes, conditions, and other related information? I have heard of real estate agents doing that, but I haven't seen private, just like the whole tour, like do a coordinated thing for the entire town. But you could definitely do that. I think that would be really cool. Put the QR code, put a little, the short code so they could type it in, or you could do it. The other trick that works really well with folks is text for more information. Text this code to that number to get more information. And then you just have to sign up for a service that does that. and you can get more information sent straight to people's phones that way. You can just send them a link to the same place that your QR code would send them, your mobile friendly information. I am going to do just a little bit while everybody's here, if you guys are interested in a couple of other things. Let's talk about those roofless buildings because they're a real challenge. Does that sound okay with you, Nancy?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, okay. So let's also do windows. We'll do windows and we'll do we'll do some of the roofless building stuff. So if it's still got windows, then you can rent the front windows out for a display. This is one. The other thing is stuff you can put into front windows besides just leaving them empty. One is to show historical photos. This is Central City in Iowa. And they had these printed. These are static cling sticky displays that are historical photos, not necessarily of this building, but of any building, so that they can move them to a new location when this building fills back up, which I thought was really kind of a cool idea. Then this is in Longview, Texas. And they took the photos of this building itself and had an architect render what it could look like if this building was full. So you're like looking into the actual, what this exact building could look like if it was full. And so then they put these up. These are vinyl displays that were printed by a standard printer and are on the outside of the window, or on the inside of the window, but they're not removable. They can't redo them. I'm going to go back a slide and see if I can see the answer to the question of where, Candace asked, where did they get those printed? They had a graphic design company crop the image, change their coloration, and put the Main Street banner at the bottom. The files were sent to a place called Letters Unlimited in Schaumburg, Illinois, where they were printed on large scale static cling material. So I will type that into the chat for you. Letters Unlimited in SCHAUMBURG, Illinois. All right. Okay, so that is where because they're not perforated window skins, those are destroyed when they're taken down, but these are movable. And they did 9 so far, and the total cost was $2,000 for their 9 banners that they have done. So that gives you some cool info. All right, now I have to switch back, and then did that switch? There we go. Okay, so that's in Longview where they're looking at where they had those artists renderings done of exactly what this building could look like. Man, I think that's super cool. Another thing, it doesn't have to have anything to do with this building. You could just do art displays right in the windows. And this was in Renton, Washington, where they had artist Tori Franklin do this illustration she does fairy tale illustrations. So you can see as you look past it, you are looking into an empty building there. There's not a thing going on in that building, but there's this beautiful fairy tale in the windows now. So any local artist could probably do some kind of a really cool installation for you in empty windows. And let's also talk about those roofless buildings. So the usual thing is, you just end up with an empty lot that people are using for storage or a pocket park, or they fence it off so that nobody can get in there. Here's a pocket park. This is probably the world's least inspiring pocket park. It does have some grass and trees, and I'm not picking on Beaver. It's just, it's pretty basic. I do want to point out, when you have a roofless building like this, you do need to do some safety work first. You need to make sure those interior walls are sealed, because they were not designed to be exposed to weather, and so they need to be sealed so that they are protected. Otherwise, that will destroy the integrity of the neighboring building. That's super important to know. And then check for hidden basements, because a lot of our old style buildings have some basements down that you don't even know about, and you don't want people falling through. So then if you can save the storefront, you can let maybe the back part of the building go. This is in a place in Michigan that I'm not gonna pronounce it wrong, but Negaunee, Michigan. They kept the storefronts and then let the back, and they called it a historic ruin is the way they refer to it. So this was, these are actually architects' renderings, and that project did not happen, and the building was ultimately demolished, which I think is a sad thing. Look at that beautiful facade that they could have saved. So you can also just kind of crowdsource solutions to your empty lots, and just let people take it over. So if you have a community group in town or school kids, give them the empty lot for a month and say, go to it, do anything you want. This particular example from Cleveland is they turned it over to librarians, and they did literary lots is what they called it. And so they had an Alice in Wonderland's tea party on the empty lot, which is much better than it just being empty for another month. Have a tea party, do anything.
Becky,
and you can just,
you don't know that Candace is a librarian, and she'll be all over that.
I want pictures, man. I want to see it. Oh, so, you know, you can just put it up and just ask people, what do they want to do there? You know, so just try some lighter, quicker, cheaper, just do temporary things. You know, on this sign, this was actually done in Chicago, and they asked people, what do you want to do on this empty lot? One of the answers is dance. And you know what? You can do that tomorrow. You just need to bring some tunes, put out some sound, and let's just dance on the empty lot. And why not? Because you know what? You're building a sense of community, and you may think, well, that's not creating any jobs, but it's bringing life and activity downtown. It's building a sense of community. It's silly, it's fun, and it changes everybody's perception about what you're doing, because you clean the lot, take the weeds off of it, and just hold a dance. Why not? Why not? There's nobody stopping you. So then this is Cincinnati. They did a lot expo, and so they tapped everybody's ideas and they put them into place just temporarily. I'm going to skip just a couple of these and go to what you can do if you're going to do the pocket park. This is Cuba, Missouri. They did the pocket park, and they've spent 20 years slowly making it better. Jane Reed sent me this picture. This is version 2. This is after they took away the falling down greenhouse. So this is like the improved version. And then 10 years later, or 20 years later, now it looks like this. There's that same brick backstop, beautiful displays, lovely mature gardens. So, you know, don't just think, okay, we put some plants and that's good enough. We're just going to go on. You can use an empty lot as a permaculture space and use it for flood control. So this is one that was done in Staunton, Virginia, and this Detroit is going to use some empty lots, and instead of the foundations, this is a rendering of just using them to collect stormwater and keep it out of the drainage system, which I think is pretty smart. This one's in Concrete, Washington, where they did a community garden on an empty lot, and they're a mountain town, so they're based, you know, like they're real vertical there, and there's not a lot of space for people to have a garden, so a community garden turned out to be a big thing for them. Add places for people to sit, add bathrooms. This one's in Tishomingo, Oklahoma. And this is like the gorgeous deluxe version of a pocket park. I mean, look at the beautiful landscaping and the fountain, and then the little winding walk, and then public restrooms, the gold standard. Trust me, there's not enough public restrooms in your downtown. There's just not. There can't be. You can art all over your empty lots. This one is, you can see they had the tiles are locally done, the metal panels, the fabric banners, and the sculpture. The whole thing is just featuring local art in what was otherwise just not really doing anything. So, and you can see it's right there between two buildings. Albany, Georgia turned a big empty shell building into a graffiti park and said, we have a graffiti problem, let's turn it into a graffiti opportunity, and just let people paint all over in this one designated area. You can see at the very bottom of the picture, there's a trash can because they're encouraging the people to keep it relatively clean. But people put in some really beautiful art in the graffiti art area. And so don't think that it's just all gonna be ugly. And that space, I'm gonna skip back. That space is now returning to being used. It's going to be a microbrewery. And so the art park is going to have to find a new home. But because they saved it, because they saved the facade, they were able to redevelop that space, which I think is pretty cool. So let's see some of the other cool ideas. I want to get to the, where is it? Here we go. Let's go, let's eat it. Dining alfresco. Okay, this one's in St. Francis. I got this from Marcy Penner. That's a building with no roof. If you look through the front windows here, you can kind of see you're looking right up into the sky. There is no roof there, but it's a coffee shop. Inside, once again, there's no roof, but there are still rafters, and they put little like portable buildings in there. that give them a place to do their kitchen. And then there's some seating. And look, they didn't even like pave the whole thing. They just put some pavers down to make some little seating areas, and the rest of it's gravel. And they put a trash can, and they hung some things from the old rafters. So you don't have to restore the whole building to put it back into use. You can put some little temporary buildings inside of it to use as the kitchen space, and then you have all the rest of it. They did this in Paris, Texas. This is 107 Grand is the name of it because it's the address for it. But you can see clearly no roof, but they put doors back in the front because at night it's a beer garden, which I think is so much better than an empty lot. And once again, you can see they've put a little tiny building inside of the big building's footprint, but we're still open to the sky mostly, and we just have chairs and tables. So it's a much better use than just leaving it there with nothing going on. So I got a million of them. I got a lot more ideas here, but I want to pause for a moment and see if you have any more questions or if you have ideas or specific things you'd like me to talk about, because I kind of breezed through all of those real quickly. So throw them in the chat, folks. We're wide open here. Or at least put in a quick comment that says we are awake so that we know that we have not bored you into sleep. We try not to do that. I promise it's not the usual, it wasn't a bunch of slides of, charts and graphs. At least it was interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll show you one more empty lot thing. And I think we can wrap up just a little early if that's okay with everyone. I know you could use another couple of minutes. I have a lot more stuff, but I'll tell one last story to wrap up. And this is in, let's see here, Tionesta, Pennsylvania. And they are a population of 500 people. So this is a small town. And then an empty lot, a building burned down, and it sat there for 10 years. 10 years. And they tried to get every developer they could to come and put anything on their empty lot. So they wouldn't. So the Industrial Development Corporation took a flyer on a crazy idea. And this is what they did. They bulldozed the lot a little bit, smoothed it up, put some landscaping, and they put storage sheds on the lot to hold temporary businesses. So it's the tiny business village. So each one of these little storage sheds is dressed up. It's got a little front, and the fronts are designed to go with the downtown buildings, which are right across the street. Downtown is just right across the street from this. And then the farmer's market is over on the other side. So, it's a critical corner. So they put these in there, they dressed them up, they made them look nice. They have had a waiting list since the day they started the project. And they have had businesses in there full time. They meant for it to be just seasonal, only in the summer. They're not insulated, they're just storage sheds. But they have, actually, the businesses said, we can't close for the winter, we want to be here the whole time. It has actually managed to get some of the local businesses across the street to improve their own facades to look as nice as the storage sheds, which I think is maybe your initial concern with storage sheds would look junky. They've actually encouraged the regular buildings to get improvements going as well. And they have gotten some existing businesses to extend their hours and be open longer, which I think is another big win because they've got so much excitement, interesting stuff going on there. They offer Wi-Fi. It's a great place for people to gather. And so I think that's such a great example of what you can do with an empty lot that's otherwise not doing anything, is just put some little storage sheds in there and have temporary businesses just for a time to help address this. I will say, I'm going to switch back to the little handout slide that has my websites so you can find me. I will send Nancy the handout, which has links to all of this stuff. It doesn't have photos of everything in it, but it has links to a lot of articles and resources and other places that have some cool photos. And there's one particular article specifically on the empty buildings, roofless buildings. I have an article called 19 Things to Do with a Building That Has No Roof. And there's a link to that. And that has lots of photos. It has the bear garden in Paris, and it has the coffee shop that's in St. Francis, so that you can see those photos and have them as a reminder, because I think those empty buildings that don't have any roof anymore, they're a problem for all of us. And so it's really great to see examples of people that have done something productive with those spaces instead of just leaving them sitting there.
So Becky, just to reiterate what I thought I heard you say, so the issue of heat is that those places are just seasonal during the times that they are able to be used roofless. Is that correct?
The one I was particularly talking about when I talked about seasonal was the in Tionesta, Pennsylvania, the little storage sheds. Those are not insulated, and so those were intended to be seasonal, but people toughed it out and were there all year. And I am sure that the coffee shop in St. Francis, you can get coffee all year. You just may not want to sit outside all year long.
Okay.
But it's a bright, clear day today. It may be a little cool out, but somebody may want to sit down and have coffee outside. The Paris, Texas, their weather is such that I'm sure there are people in there 10 months out of the year.
In the beer garden.
Yeah. So it just depends on where you are. And then that same idea has been used by some kids, just used it in South Dakota, Miller, South Dakota. They went to a person that sells storage sheds and said, for the Christmas festival, we want to borrow 4 of your storage sheds and put businesses in them. So they did that. And it was during the Christmas festival. So they had it was pretty cold, but they're South Dakotans. They were prepared. They were all bundled up and put up with it nicely. So the issue of, can it be seasonal? Can you be there all year? It just kind of depends on how tough your folks are, how the weather is, and how things go. So, do as much as you can, but start in the summer when there's nice weather and get people excited about it.
So folks on the call, thanks, you've been really great. And I can tell that you get as much out of this as I do. I want you to please go to Becky's SaveYour.town website, because Becky and Deb Brown do a monthly telephone call, and I've found every one of them to be helpful. There is a $20 charge to participate in the telephone call, but to tell you the truth, the hardest part is giving up the hour, and the $20 actually just motivates me to say, I've paid for it, I need to do it, and I'm never sorry that I do. They're at 6 o'clock in the evenings, and I'll let Becky tell us what the next call is. But a telephone call with your feet up in your pajamas with a beer by your side is very negotiable. And I always come away energized and feeling just like this, that I've been exposed to a lot of good information and I know where to go back and get it. And there's always a handout. The handouts are worth the $20 by themselves.
So yes, we do those, and sometimes we call them webinars, but because it's always our live streaming video, so you just see our faces as opposed to doing the slides. Those are every month. There are $20, and the next one is on the Committee of Negativity. And I'm sure that none of you have a problem with the Committee of Negativity in your town, but if you do, you may want to join us for those. They're available live at 6 o'clock in the evening, and then they're available on demand, recorded for 2 weeks, only 2 weeks after that. And that's to motivate you to actually take your time and go watch the thing while it's still available to you. And then we have a membership program. If you want to have access to all of our previous recordings, including the one we did on empty buildings, the one we did on empty lots, those are available to members. We have a membership program, and that, if you are a member at $25 a month, that gets you access to our current call, whatever that call is that month. And then if you don't want to pay anything, we do have, or can't afford to, I mean, I understand, small towns, we are dealing with limited budgets. We do have a free newsletter that goes out by email every week. There's one from me and one from my colleague Deb, and mine is called A Positive View of Rural, because I had had enough of the negative view of rural that came to my email. So you're welcome to sign up for that. It will be no charge. And Nancy will send you the handout. There will be a link where you can follow to go find all of our stuff at SaveYour.town. You're welcome to drop in anytime. And thank you so much for your attention and your questions and your encouragement today. I think we had a good time.
Very good. Thank you so much, Becky, for being with us. Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.